First couple of weeks of January have been pretty cold here in Durham. Lots of still, bright days and negative temperatures between at least the 2nd and the 12th of January. We've seen snow all around the country. We're not seeing loads around where we are here, but we've had weather warnings and we've had some pretty low temperatures across the whole country. I live in a home with a heat pump, and depending on what you read on the internet or who you listen to, this kind of extreme weather would mean that we can't keep our home warm. So I've got to wear all this kit to stay warm when it goes cold outside. Well, that's obviously not true. So how have we got on over the last 10 days of this cold snap? Have we been shivering wrapped in these warm clothes, or has a heating system done exactly what it's supposed to do and heat our home? In this video, I'm going to go into some of the detail of what the weather has been here in Durham, how we felt inside, the costs to run our heat pump over that period, and a few of the things that I've learned in this extended cold snap. I'll take all this off because we haven't needed it. It is perfectly warm in here. A bit of a spoiler for you, the heat pump has heated our home throughout the cold snap. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's get into the detail. First, how cold has it got in Durham? I have some access to some temperature sensors that have measured the temperature around Durham, and here's one location. One location isn't perfect. It could be impacted by the buildings around it and the microclimate and certain times of sunlight and wind and all that kind of stuff. So one data set is imperfect, but it does give us an idea of the kind of temperatures in my area over this start of January. So here's the graph of that from that thermometer, that temperature sensor, of temperatures between the 2nd and the 12th of January. You can see that it got to a low of minus 3.78 degrees, and the air temperature was negative for around 123 hours of that 11-day period, or almost 50% of the time. And that the average temperature over that whole time was just under 0 degrees at minus 0.06 degrees C. So it's fairly cold. Probably not as cold as many places in the UK in the last couple of weeks. The measured temperature I had does match some of the temperatures forecast throughout this week. So I'm going to assume that that measured temperature matches the temperatures that we experienced at home and what our heat pump kept us warm with. So what about our home? We must live in a super insulated home to have a heat pump. Well, no, not really. We're in a Victorian terrace built in the 1880s with some changes at various times. The changes include a small extension at the back in 2018, and we've got radiators and a small area of underfloor heating in the building. We've got double glazing, we've got loft insulation. That's about it. I think we're a fairly standard home. We may be a little bit of a leaky home. We had our heat pump installed in summer of 2021, so we've had a few years of experience living with it now. So as we and many other people have experienced, a heat pump can heat any home if it's sized correctly and if it's installed well. Our heat pump and our home is not an exception to that. But it is worth pointing out how our system was sized. So any good installer would size the radiators and heat pump based on a heat loss assessment of the home and room by room. So sizing a radiator for a room so that it could heat that room. And this assessment is based on the type and quality of what we call building fabric. So the walls, the windows, the roof, the floor, all that kind of stuff. It would take account of the home's leakiness or the air changes that we see in the house, which can vary depending on the weather and the wind. And it would also size the system based on what the comfortable temperature would be for that house at an assumed external temperature. So there's a few assumptions that go into sizing a heat pump, and if any of those assumptions that go into that assessment are wrong or a little bit out, we risk having an oversized or undersized system. And that's not necessarily a problem, but if a system is not sized well, it might struggle in the coldest weather. And I'll try and go into what I mean by struggle later on. Or it might not have the best efficiency all year round. But yeah, if a heat pump was a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller than it needs to be, it should still be able to heat a home all year round. So for our system, my understanding, is that we had a heat loss calculated at just over 5 kilowatts. So the Valent Aerotherm Plus 5 kilowatt heat pump, and that datasheet says it can meet that heat loss. So as long as the pipework and the radiator is sized correctly, we should be okay all year round. But if you look into the sizing of our system and the heat loss assessment, what external temperature was all of our systems sized at? When I started my career designing commercial heating systems back in 2012, the assumption was that we would size heating systems based on a worst case external temperature of -5 degrees. But for our system at home, our installer sized the radiators and the heat pump at an external temperature of -2 degrees. I wasn't and I'm not too worried about that, but when you have temperatures this month at nearly -4, you do wonder whether all this is going to work okay. So how did we get on this month? I mean, I took meter readings of our heat output and our electricity input at times throughout the week, so I can give some information on how the system performed, on efficiency, on the cost of running the system, and on the emissions of our heat pump compared to an equivalent gas boiler for that period. But I'll start by saying we were warm throughout the week. Our hallway, that we sometimes call the Arctic tundra, got down to about 16 or 17 degrees at times, but that's partly because we have a radiator cover that reduces the heat output. We also have a large external door and an external wall in the hallway. The occupied spaces were comfortable at 19 degrees and above for the whole time. And our most occupied space, the place where we spend most of our time, was above 20 degrees C for all the time of that cold snap. And I should point out that the heat pump may well be able to heat to higher temperatures than this, but that's what we've set the system to, that's what we're comfortable with, and that's what we're happy with. It's funny living in a home with a heat pump where the heating is always on, because we fairly often have friends come round who walk into our home and say, "Whoa, your house is so warm," compared to how they run their system with a gas boiler. And I should say we heat our hot water to 48 degrees C for hot water from taps and for showers, and the heat pump is able to do that throughout the cold snap. So into the data, what about efficiency of the heat pump? So during that 10-11 day cold period, our heat pump used 447 kilowatt hours of electricity to deliver 1,167 kilowatt hours of heat, meaning an efficiency of 261% or a coefficient of performance of 2.61. This is low for our system. And it means that our costs for heating and hot water during that time were just under £100 at £98.92 for that 11 days of heating. That's a lot of money for such a short period of time. And if we'd assumed that instead of a heat pump, we had a gas boiler delivering the same heat and therefore the same comfort and the same internal temperatures, and it was operating at efficiency of 90%, that would have had a cost of around £82, which is still a lot of money, but a bit cheaper over that period than our heat pump. What about emissions? Emissions are the key thing that I care about, and I think we should be thinking about when we think about heat pumps. So using the standard emissions calculation methodology, our heat pump would have emitted 144 kilograms of CO2 less than a gas boiler, or a 61% reduction in emissions. And I should caveat that with the fact that over that cold snap, it was actually quite still for those 10-11 days. So wind generation was a bit lower than what we might normally get. If we assumed that the emissions intensity was a bit higher than the average that we use for reporting, let's say at around 300 grams of CO2 compared with 200 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour on average, that would mean that most electricity was coming from gas power stations during that period. The heat pump would still be around 45% lower emissions than a gas boiler. Either way, the heat pump gives us a step change in emissions, even during a low efficiency cold snap. But to be clear, the start of 2025 has seen low efficiency for our system. But despite that, it still maintained temperatures in our home. Yes, we have had high costs and we've had higher than usual emissions, but emissions are still a step change lower than if we'd had a gas boiler doing the same thing. I wonder how other heat pump systems performed and whether there's anything else that we could compare with. Well, luckily we do have lots that we can compare with. And there is a fantastic resource called the Heat Pump Monitor that has a list of over 300 systems and their efficiency over that time period. You can see that there are many systems registered on that site that have efficiencies well above ours for January. I'm probably going to do another video one day to go into the detail of the Heat Pump Monitor website, because I think it's a really valuable resource and it kind of helps dispel some half-truths or myths about heat pumps around our country. And I should add one further bit of clarification. Although our system didn't thrive over that cold snap, the story over the whole year is different. At the end of December, we had an efficiency of 385%. Over the whole of 2024, we averaged 347%. The cold weather does impact on our heat pump significantly, but in the wider context, the performance is better throughout the year. I did an overview of 2024 in a video recently, so please do have a look at that. The performance of a heat pump at any instant does not tell the whole story. So would I say that our heat pump struggled over the cold snap? Well, yes and no. It didn't struggle in terms of doing its primary purpose, keeping us warm and showered, but it did struggle in terms of lower efficiency than what we might normally expect. But when we're talking about efficiency, we're really talking about cost. So high efficiency equals lower cost. So although many heat pump installations won't have this level of detail of data on efficiency, people will still care about how they're performing because the costs will change. There will have been some homes heated by heat pumps, or in fact heated by gas boilers, that struggled during a cold snap, where people may have had to wrapped up warm or got the blankets out or put on a thick jumper and their thermals. Maybe even boil a kettle for a hot water bottle. It was really quite cold for a lot of the UK. And there are probably things that we could do for our heating systems to get a little bit more out of them on the coldest day. And I mean gas boilers or heat pumps. And that may mean that settings need to change to increase what we call the flow temperature or radiator temperature of the boiler or the heat pump on the coldest day. We could be sacrificing a bit of efficiency of either system to make sure there's enough heat in the house. It may mean we need to leave heating on for that little bit longer, but when it's the coldest, our heating systems do work hard, whether it's a wood burner, a gas boiler, or a heat pump. Anyway, I'm going slightly off topic there. The start of 2025 saw a significant, well, maybe a bit of a cold snap in the UK, but we stayed warm here in Durham. The heat pump efficiency was lower than what we normally see, so costs were a little bit higher than if we had a gas boiler. But over the whole year, costs are probably a little bit lower than running with a gas boiler for the same comfort. And I should say there are loads of examples on the Heat Pump Monitor website that show other systems working much more efficiently than our one. Now the weather is that bit milder again, the heat pump efficiency has gone up dramatically. Okay, that's all I've got planned to say for today. I hope that's helpful. I hope that settles any nerves about how heat pumps work in cold weather. If you've got any points you want to make or any questions, I'd love to see a comment below. And if you've not subscribed to the channel before, that's absolutely fine, no pressure. But if you did want to see any more of my videos about our heat pump or about low carbon technology more broadly, drop the channel a subscribe and you'll see them come through more regularly.